It's turning out to be another big week. We recently found out there might be a pathway for overturning Roe v. Wade. Most of you are familiar with what Roe v. Wade is. They used two main arguments for establishing the legality of abortion in the U.S. The first one was the woman's right to privacy. The second is an argument for viability, and Roe v. Wade established that the 28-week point was the point of viability, or the point at which the fetus was able to live outside of the womb. Now, this point changes from state to state, and a lot of our modern technology has opened this debate back up too. It's essentially pushed some of what the possible time frame or what could be considered a viable fetus much earlier, just due to the technology and what it's given us the ability to do with some of these premature babies, number of different situations. It's pretty amazing what we can do now for those little ones that don't get the chance to form as properly as they should have. And viability itself, for me, it provided, I guess, what you could call a decent framework for the citizen to understand when it was legal within the eyes of the state to kill that little one. But it never really made a good attempt at establishing whether or not that was a life, a human life, that should be protected. They more or less skipped over that and put an emphasis on the woman's right to privacy and then demeaned the life of the baby due to the fact that before 28 weeks, they essentially established that because it couldn't live on its own, that it's a lesser life. There wasn't a good argument or established framework for people to actually decide whether or not that's a life we should be protecting. That kind of got leapfrogged over. Scalise, what do you have to say?
Yeah, you're getting into some really broad questions here. I mean, and they're questions that we need to be cognizant of, because I think the speed at which politics runs oftentimes makes it difficult for us to really get our arms around it. And obviously, these are discussions that, I wasn't alive when Roe v. Wade was being argued in the courts, and this has become central, friends, because just over the past 2 days, Justice Alito had written an opinion that was not to be shared. It was leaked, probably by either the Supreme Court is infiltrated, is what this tells you. Exactly by whom? Is it staffers? Could there be rogue leftist Supreme Court justices? Could the emails be hacked? I mean, who knows, right? But what it tells you is that the Supreme Court is compromised or infiltrated by somebody, that this leak could occur, and a opinion doesn't necessarily mean that the court is going to decide to overturn Roe v. Wade, but it is a very good indicator that that's the direction they're moving in. And so as such, this got leaked at the same time as Dinesh D'Souza's 2000 Mules movie came out, which details with videographic evidence and all the evidence created from the cell phones of the criminal syndicate that did ballot harvesting, that the November 3rd, 2020 election was stolen. So it's a bit of a distraction tactic, but it's also a kind of rallying cry, probably a way to try to get the left motivated for the upcoming midterm elections. It also acts as a trap by the left for any rhino Republicans or weak-willed, perhaps they're actually true Republicans, even though I think there's only about 5 or 6 of these, to flip-flop on the issue coming up to the midterms, which could spell disaster for any of them, because most of us out here are pro-life, not pro-death, which I know they like to say pro-choice, but that's a really a bit of a misleading way of putting it, because a child does die, or if you want to say that they are living cells die, if you want to try to cater to the leftist talking points. But either way, what Aaron's getting into here, and then I'll let him pick back up, is just the fundamental fact that what was the name of that again, Aaron? It was viability. So this criteria of viability, this is you entering the scientific, basic legal framework, a manner in which you intend to argue before a court, and in a society that had been really dedicated to scientism and what's called modernism. and his outgrowth of it, and was in the 1970s. Remember, this is coming on the heels of the sexual revolution and a rash abandonment of traditional values, the Judeo-Christian worldview. And so you're going to be left with, how do we adjudicate, how do we judge that something is truly alive or not, if you're not going to rely on the traditional standards, which would be something like what's in the Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution, that every human life is made in the image of God and therefore has intrinsic value. And hence, that's also the reason why the government doesn't give you your value or can dictate itself as the supreme authority, because the preamble to the Constitution would say that God is the one that provides those rights and values, and that therefore no human government, small or large, can take it from you. So viability, though, is them essentially saying, if we're not going to use God or traditional values to try to judge what life is, and of course that's as Aaron, I'll let you go on to discuss, but doesn't the isn't there something about the what exactly is viability? Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, viability is roughly the point at which the fetus can live outside of the womb, the point in its development where it can live outside of the womb. And Roe v. Wade established a federal guidelines that's roughly 28 weeks for viability. One of the interesting things, though, and people check this, as far as the way Roe v. Wade was established, they did not make an attempt to firmly establish whether or not that was a human being that should be protected. They kind of roughly used it to demean the significance. Like, viability was used kind of roughly to demean the significance of the life there, via its inability pre 28 weeks, at least what they thought at that point. Technology, our modern technology, is starting to blur the lines on viability right now, but it seemed like the actual humanity of the baby in large part was ignored. It was basically roughly demeaned and then put the impetus on the right for the woman to have privacy, and her rights more or less trumped the rights of the other human. They're really, I mean, if you look back on, and somebody can try to correct me, but this is one of those things that I found absolutely wild about Roe v. Wade is they basically kind of ignored that in a lot of ways. They ignored the humanity of the baby, used viability to demean it, and then put the import on protecting the rights or the privacy of the female.
Which is why they would say it's a matter of pro-choice, right? It's not a matter of pro-death, because they're basically essentially saying that since the life isn't viable yet, can't live on its own outside of the womb, it is therefore not a human life, which already in a sense is not scientifically accurate. So, and let's throw this in there because this is not unimportant. So a baby is not just the woman's body, which is the common argument that a woman has a right to privacy and it's her body. It's actually the cells of a man as well. It's the conjoining of a female cells and male cells that form a baby. So I always thought it just incredibly striking that they just, of course I wasn't alive in the 1970s, but that they just threw off the notion, or very obvious scientific fact, that it isn't the woman's body only. It's the man body as well. Yeah. But he gets no say in it. Evidently, he has no right to his body, which is that's really what you're saying. You're saying that if that baby is part of his body as well, and it is, scientifically, it is, then why in the world would he not have a say over the matter? To me, this looks utterly convoluted, just on the face of it, scientifically.
And part of that argument years ago that I brought up to you, I projected, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I thought that they would use this to legitimize the idea of killing babies after birth. Now that's in the public square.
Oh, yeah. If anyone missed this, you could easily go. It's in my Telegram. So again, we'll start posting a link to my Telegram so you can go. But it was a video done by Alex Jones, and it wasn't anything controversial. It was just somebody that works for him interviewing people in California, women. And I mean, many of them were saying they thought that a baby should be able to be killed up to 10 weeks outside of the womb. And of course, there was a recent story that in DC that they were doing this already, killing babies that were alive outside of the womb. And that's really just, to my mind, insane and grotesque. And but it bespeaks or it actually really highlights how prophetic you were, Aaron, in predicting this. And it's a logical extrapolation, it would seem.
Well, it's because of how arbitrary that argument was or insignificant and piss poor that argument was for establishing whether or not that was a human life that should be protected. And I think it was done purposefully. I think that particular framework was done purposefully so that later they could move the goalpost. Well, and I know, again, I said it before that people might think I'm a little crazy on that one. I personally think the end game of this one is to be the gatekeeper, to decide, even for political dissidents, as people generally speaking, give the power to the government to decide who they believe has the right to breathe air.
Yeah, and let's throw in this little fact. This was released in 2020, but it is the deathbed confession of the notorious Roe, of Wade v. Roe. And she basically confessed to the fact that there was some almost secret group, but it was definitely a political group, was feeding her what to say. And that much of what she said in the court was scripted by somebody else, not her. It wasn't her opinion. So I thought that was very revealing. But the bigger issue that you're getting into is that who's going to decide if you don't say that life begins at conception,
God,
if you don't go to that extreme, then you're going to say that humanity, we have to come to a group consensus to determine what are the criteria by which we judge life. And then you have to ask the question, what people should compose the group that decides what those criteria should be? And this is your very point, Aaron. And you're going to have to have some group, and it's going to end up being the biggest, most powerful group because they control the flow of information. That's going to try to frame the narrative, and that's going to be the mainstream media and the political activists and the political groups that get their funding from abortion. Don't miss that, friends. This isn't merely a discussion about a woman's privacy rights. Don't be misled. This is a major funding of the Democratic Party, and so don't miss that. This is as much about money as it is about these basic philosophical rights. But back to the broader point, and that's just to say, sure, you can abandon traditional Judeo-Christian values. You can abandon a traditional theistic worldview. If you do so, though, just understand that this is the inexorable, and when I say inexorable, it means it's a necessary conclusion that will come of that. Because somebody's then going to have to decide. If you're not going to say, well, we're going to go with the way God framed nature and conception to be the determining point of which life begins, basically following the biological science of conception and life and growth. If you're not going to follow that, then it's going to be arbitrarily based on the most powerful group's will, period. You don't have any other option.
Yeah. And the thing is the only point in the development of that little human that gives any kind of concrete position to make an actual serious legal decision on is conception. Anything after that is just, it's arbitrary. Like it's pretty much, it's an arbitrary decision after that one. I mean, you have all the pieces there already, starting to split and create that little human being. After that point, like, everything is there.
And we were discussing this.
That's the most concrete.
We were discussing this in the pre-show. I just wanted to highlight it because I thought it was important. We were discussing the fact that viability is really dangerous for the post-birth argument because it can live outside the womb, right? Let's focus down on that phrase. What does that entail? Does that mean that they need to be able to feed themselves? Does it mean that they need to be able to do daily tasks on their own? I mean, because you can, if somebody starts playing with that definition, which the left will, because that's what the left does,
and they are,
yeah, they are right now. I mean, like, you could start getting insane. You could start talking 10 months, 3 years out. Yeah. I mean, where does that? I mean, when is a little child actually able to take care of themselves? I mean, that's a long way out after birth.
And that's why I don't believe that the end goal of this was really abortion at all. I think that was a good starting point, if you can call it a good starting point. It's a good starting point. They piggybacked on a lot of the women's rights issues, which, to be honest, abortion was always a really weird one to begin with. I mean, that one just, I understand the whole, like, woman's right to her body, but, you know, and among the other arguments as far as just equal pay, the ability to vote, which was established, and what year was that women's suffrage?
Yeah, women's suffrage. I don't know. Keep going. I'll look it up as you talk.
I forget. Like, they basically piggybacked this one on women's rights, and it did not. I mean, granted, I wasn't alive when they made this decision, but when I became of age, or able to actually consider this particular topic seriously, that just didn't make. I don't know. It didn't make sense. It felt really forced. It felt like women's equal rights was just used again. The same kind of thing that we discussed in the last video. You take something good, like the equal rights of women, you throw that in people's face and suggest that if you don't support a woman's right to murder her baby, that you're against women, that you're a misogynist, a creep, any number of different things that they try to accuse you of. And it's like, no. This is a conversation about the life of another human being, and the
man's body. I mean,
exactly.
let's not let that get lost, because it's not only a question of
it is important,
the new life, but it's also a question of the man's body that it happens to be in that woman, which she freely chose in many cases. Not every case, right? We can get into the rape discussion if we need to drill down to that. That's probably a whole other episode in and of itself. But
it is.
But the point is that it's not just her body. It's the baby. And here's the thing: pregnancy. And I only know this now because I'm a father of 3 now, but. The woman's body at a very, very early on recognizes that those group of cells as a foreign entity, and the way that it treats it. There's even disorders where the woman's body attacks it like it's a foreign alien group of cells. So that it's not this. I mean, even the biology, again, being scientific, even the science of it, it says that the woman's body recognizes it as something else from her. So it's its own life, and it's the man's life. And and there's no way to get around that, right? Even if you want to say, well, it's not a human life until it has a brain, or whatever try to fancy argument you want to make there to try to muddy the waters. You just say, but it's the man's body from the second he inseminates the woman and they conceive. Like, that's part of it's now the man's body too.
And think about this: the viability argument didn't really try to establish whether or not it was a human life. It established a category of human that was demeaned enough that it could be killed, is what it argued. That's the interesting part. So if you want their framework for how they would argue against that, is just, well, that male sperm, or the actual property there of the male, if you want to use their language, they would just say, that's insignificant. They would argue in some way. They would demean it. They wouldn't actually define those things accurately. They would just find some way to demean its importance versus whatever target they were trying to prop up. That's pretty much how they succeeded.
Well, the left is really good at framing the narrative because they control all the major levers of public discussion. Of course, that's changing now.
Yeah.
Thank God. But
hopefully,
they've been able to do exactly what you're describing, and hopefully that'll change. Because the digital soldiers, the alt media, it is so pervasive now. The change, like Elon Musk and Twitter and all, that's great. But the change was already long in the works, and it's a change by the people. And I'm actually an outgrowth of it. I was a mainstream media guy up until about 2019, and then when after the first impeachment attempt on President Trump, after that I just started going all over the place looking for other alternatives for getting information, because you just started seeing how biased it, grossly biased, and how fake it was. And now we've got all these new platforms by which to facilitate the conversation. They can't control it. And again, like, I don't want to underplay Elon Musk, but I also don't want to see him as the hero, because really this is a people's movement, and it was long in coming, long before he entered the fray here a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully that continues forward. I would love to see Roe v. Wade overturned. Personally, I don't know why it was brought up now, though. Like, that's the thing is, I mean, granted, you established that it was probably to,
Aaron,
to distract from the election.
Let's pause real quick. I got to take a phone call. It's my wife.
Gotcha. Sorry. That is a really good question.
So you had mentioned a while back, and I think this was during the pre-show, something that was really atrocious. That had to do with, it was something around the framework of abortion, and something relatively monstrous about it. And I'll give you a second to think about that. The thing that I think is really telling is the fact that, and this came out, I want to say about a year ago, the University of Pittsburgh has I hate to say it, it's kind of grotesque, it's something straight out of hell, but a baby parts warehouse, University of Pittsburgh, and of course it is partially tax funded.
Oh yeah,
because that is a public university, and it's utterly grotesque that we would basically create a warehouse of body parts. I mean, I don't know how many people maybe played Diablo as a kid or when you were younger, but it is frightening to think that some of the grotesque things that you might see descending into hell in a video game would be something at the street corner right down there at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's kind of nauseating, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of further bolsters just that. I mean, it's not like I'm just trying to pick away at or find things to just prop my argument up, but some of the stuff that they're doing it further makes me believe what I think about their argument, or why they argued the way that they did is true, and that's to just be able to do whatever they want with the human beings that are, per their beliefs, underneath them, like the ones that they rule. They clearly have this desire and are moving towards a world where, whether it's choosing whether you can live or die, I mean, broadly speaking, it's just a matter of whether or not you can live, or whether or not you can do whatever it is you hope to do with your life, and make free decisions to do so, and not basically have to go through them as the gatekeeper for everything, even down to whether or not you should breathe. I think is the end goal, and I know I said that pretty broken and horribly, to be honest, right there, but that ability to just cut little babies apart and sell them, and it's basically just a meat market of human beings. I mean, come on, what other evidence do you need? That kind of disregard for human life. Do you really think those people have any qualms doing anything to you, whatever comes into their mind? If you believe those kinds of people who support this have any limits on the creativity or disgusting shit that they, might, basically they see they have the right to do to you, don't put it past them. Don't put anything past people.
Yeah, don't put any. I mean, we were laughing earlier, and we're not going to get theological here, obviously. But if I had to imagine, so forget the whole actual notion of spiritual entities called demons. But if I had to come up with just a human-based word for what's a demonic entity look like, persons that would be okay with chopping up babies to put them in a meat market for resale would come very close to that definition. And real quick, though, women's suffrage, so the 19th Amendment, August 18th, 1920, gave all women the right to vote. So that is there. But the thing that you had said in advance in one of our pre-show conversations was that the thing that's really tragic about, and we'll put an asterisk on this, I don't want to go deeper into it, but you had just said that it's really remarkable that in the case of rape and abortion, that the man, in most cases, gets to live. The one that perpetrated that crime while the innocent one gets to die, namely the baby. And obviously, it's horrific, right?
It's a horrific violation
it's all just a matter of lesser.
The woman's rights. Absolutely horrific. But
right. But real quick, and then, we kind of were like throwing some ideas around, and we said, well, wouldn't it be better that if you, instead of giving all that money to that guy to be incarcerated, instead it would be his death sentence, and then that money would go to either the woman or would go straight into an account to take care of the baby, because that's a lot of money to take care of a grown male. A lot more money to take care of a grown male incarcerated like that than a little baby. That's for sure. And I could tell you.
And one of the things is, if, and this is where the viability, I basically wrote a document explaining, one, that viability doesn't really try to attempt to describe whether or not that's a human life that should be protected. And if that's the basis, so say we have jumped over that and we've decided that the rights of the woman are more important than the rights of the baby, or they supersede any kind of like acknowledgement of what's happening there. And we've decided that in the case of rape, you can kill that little human being. If that is what we've decided as a society, that you could kill the most innocent individual involved in this situation, then how does the rapist live? Why isn't it a baseline that the rapist is executed? And I know some people, and I'm not necessarily saying that should be done, but if as a society we've decided that it's fine to kill the most innocent there, then I think yes, to follow the logic, yes indeed, the rapist should die if we as a society have decided it's okay to kill the baby. I feel like that is logically consistent. And then to the other point, if there was ever a place, I'm not a huge fan of the welfare system as it is, but if there's a place for our society to take its collective funds and help individuals have welfare for individuals or families, I think this one is a really good place to apply welfare. Give that woman the help that she needs. Let's not as a society just make it our goal or basically our sole focus to try and have her kill that little one. How about we take our collected funds and give her the opportunity, if she wants, to receive monetary aid to help her with what is, going to change her life in a really radical way. But it's, if there's ever a place for welfare to be given properly, the situations of rape, I think, are very, 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 very good place for us to fight for that.
Well, yeah, and I know we said we were going to do another video on it, so I'll step aside from that. I just thought that was an interesting kind of tidbit to kind of chew on when we think through the economics of it, because economics is always a feature of human life, no matter how you slice it. So you do have to think about that, and obviously when you think about ethics and morality, it's really remarkable that they might not, that the innocent would die and the guilty would live. When you say it that way, it just smells, totally awful to begin with.
But that goes to the probably the biggest problem of that abortion provides our society to begin with, and that is the devaluation of human life. And it is such a dangerous path to go down. And yes, a slippery one, if you want to call it a slippery one or not, making the decision that it's okay to kill those little innocent humans that have no ability to defend themselves. You're on the way to becoming a death cult, a nation that is a death cult at that particular point. There's no getting around the fact that...
And this just resounds...
Yeah, sorry, go. No,
go ahead.
Well, there's no getting around the effects that kind of devaluation of human life have. You just can't. Whether you want to call it a slippery slope or not, if you decide to do this, there is... it causes something to happen in that society. You can't get around that. If you ignore it at your own peril. There's just no way that the killing of that little human being doesn't affect the way you value every other human being in that society. It just doesn't. You can't get around it.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and I mean, this just comes back to, the underlying question of worldview.
Yeah.
Greatness was built on, and this is just historical data. You don't have to be a religious person. If you're a non-religious person, great. To my mind, you can clearly be spiritual and not be religious. So, there's that entire way to advance this discussion. But historically, American greatness is based on a fundamental Judaic-Christian value society. Period. Right? You could say there's this influence or that influence, but the point is that mainstream Christianity and the Judeo-Christian values that undergirds that was part of the very fabric of the Pilgrims and initial settlers, and really the entire cultural framework of 1600s, 1700s, 1800s America. It's only when you get into the 1900s that what's called modernism, or the Enlightenment, which is the false narrative that science and faith are opposed to one another. And we're going to have another episode on that, friends, at some point. Where we'll get into the rich details of that, because I can totally explode that super easy. But the Enlightenment takes hold. Christianity starts to get marginalized, and in many cases for good reason. I mean, I'm not going to lie, Aaron. You and I talk about this often. Many times the Christians totally disgust me, even though I would say I'm somebody of profound Judeo-Christian value convictions. The fact that, just to give a recent example, the lefty loons were celebrating the fact that they were able to get a lot of these evangelical churches to be some of their grandest advancers of masking and vaccination within the church walls in some cases. I mean, and to me is just really a potent case in point of what I sometimes hate.
And an interesting one to look at too. They did the same thing with abortion in the past. They co-opted the church. The churches, especially black churches, at that point in time, they co-opted a lot of the pastors at that point too to push the narrative on that one, which resulted in the killing of so many black babies. It's crazy what the stats are right now. It's like something, in some of the bigger cities, it's something like 50% of all black pregnancies are aborted. It's Do
you remember who the founder of Planned Parenthood was? What was her name?
Oh gosh.
If you can't think of it, I'll look it up while you
yeah, no, it's shoot, it's escaping me right now. I feel like
yeah, it's okay. Just keep discussing some of those metrics, and I'll.
Well, I mean, just that number. That is such a tragic number. And it's one. Anyway, Margaret
Sanger. FYI.
I'm sorry.
So yeah, it's a tragic number. Actually, I did this when I was a professor. It was this is back in 2015 or 14, but all known Christian martyrs for 2,000 years, they think is roughly about 70 million, and in about 40 years, you have the same amount of aborted babies. So, I mean, if you want to talk about a genocide of proportions that we've never even considered, you got a giant bonfire.
And what her
essentially much bigger, much bigger.
And what her actual intent for Planned Parenthood at the beginning was too, is to control the black population. It's that's one sick organization. It's sorry, I'm actually having a hard time holding my stuff together.
Well, yeah, let me give you a few quotes by Sanger if you're having a hard time here.
I
can't stand that woman. Well, and remember, it was just recently, and I'll put the story up in my Telegram, but I think it was Hillary Clinton was celebrating the fact that she was, some Margaret Sanger rewarder. She got some award associated with Margaret Sanger, and she was talking about what a great woman she was. So pretty crazy to me that she would say something like that. But here's some quotes for you. Margaret Sanger said about her 1939 Negro Project, quote, we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out the idea if it ever occurs to any of the more rebellious members. And it should say we do not want word to go out is exactly what it says here, but there's a misspelling.
That's disgusting, man.
So we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. That's wild.
Well, and then
said that, right?
and then the who they co-opted there, right? Like, basically, isn't that basically referring to the pastors?
And and the minister is the man who can straighten out the idea if it ever occurs to any of the more rebellious members. So let's use the ministers to make sure that they don't catch on to our deception that we do want to eliminate.
It's such a sick devaluation of human life, man. Like, and that is its beginning, people. Like, that is why this was started at the beginning. The founder described it as such, and that's honestly why it's still here today. It's just broadened itself to the government being able to, like I said, essentially decide who it believes has the right to live. And I mean,
she's a eugenicist too. I mean, this is tied to her eugenicist attitude. I mean, she says in March 1939, Sanger explained to Frank Boudreau, director of the Millbank Memorial Fund, quote, that is not asking or suggesting a cradle competition between the intelligent and the ignorant, but a drastic curtailment of the birth rate at the source of the unfit, the diseased, and the incompetent. The birth control clinics all over the country are doing their utmost to reach the lower strata, that is the minorities of our population.
Yeah, which is where most of their clinics are located today, is in largely minority communities. They kept true to their mission, and weren't they? That just reminded me, that time frame that you said, that they were actually. I know some of our eugenicists here actually helped the Nazis, right? Helped Nazi Germany develop.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, America's eugenicist attitude and programs provided fuel for the ideology of the Nazis. For instance, one of the places, if you ever visit Lynchburg, Virginia, right there at the old bridge in downtown, there's one of the best well-known eugenicist facilities where they would sterilize, quote-unquote, the unfit, which is just wild to think in terms of the unfit. But by the way, don't miss the fact that this is based entirely on a Darwinistic, evolutionary, probably godless framework. Because if you believe contra this, that each human life has inherent value given by God, it's very hard to think that you could come to the conclusion that anyone would be quote-unquote unfit.
Yep. No, it definitely makes it extremely difficult, especially, when you apply the idea of all being made in his image and their value being derived from that, and not something that we can put on or take away from somebody ourselves. That's a very strong and potent idea, one that I believe society needs now more than ever, and one that I believe wholeheartedly. I do believe that we are all created in God's image, that our values is given by him, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that we have a firm foundation to make that claim on, and one that we don't have to depend on governments to bestow. And Scalise, I think that's probably a good place to wrap this one up. And like you said, we'll probably come and visit. I know we do want to have a podcast on the consideration of abortion for rape victims. I believe that's a really important one to touch. So we'll definitely come back around to that in some days to come. Let's Scalise.
Bravo, my friend. Thank you for the conversation. Really good.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you all. Cheers.